it's also one of the things that happened to many people in the 20th century, most recently in Venezuela, is that let's say you're conscientious and you save money. Well, what happens in a period of hyperinflation? Well, your money's wiped out. And so, you know, this happened to Germany, say in the 1920s, and you got to understand what hyperinflation does to a society, because what hyperinflation does is destroy the people who worked hardest to construct the society, because they're the people who've been prudent and careful and sacrificed and so forth. And then when a period of high inflation comes along, poof, everything they have disappears. And that happened in Germany during the 1920s. Now, there was a bunch of reasons for that, but so Germany was very unstable in the 1920s, right? Because of the war had just ended. They had been subjected to the Versailles Treaty, which was a very punitive treaty aimed against Germany. It's not like the Allies had lacked reasons to impose a punitive treaty, but nonetheless they did. Germany lost a lot of territory, including their industrial areas. Germany was flooded by men who were brutalized in the trenches in World War I. I mean, you could hardly imagine how terrible trench warfare is, and you can't imagine what you'd be like after a month of that, a day of that, let alone a couple of years of that. And then Germany underwent a period of hyperinflation. At the same time, in the Soviet Union, the communist revolution had been successful. And so there was tremendous political upheaval in Germany during the 1920s as well. I want to just set the stage for that. And so, but the hyperinflation wiped out all the people that were prudent and saved, and left them with a terrible sense that the entire system had betrayed them, which is of course exactly what had happened. So, all right, so anyways, conscientiousness is a bit of a mystery. You know, we've looked at plasticity, right, and already. That's a combination of extroversion and openness. I just want to walk you through again where conscientiousness is located in the big five space. So plasticity is a combination of extroversion and openness, and then stability is a combination of conscientiousness, emotional stability, and agreeableness. And conscientiousness is made out of industriousness and orderliness. Now here's some markers for conscientiousness. So here's what you're like if you're orderly or if you're industrious. You carry out your plans. You don't waste time. You don't find it difficult to get down to work. You don't mess things up. You finish what you start. You put your mind on the task at hand. You get things done quickly. You know what you're doing. You don't postpone decisions, and you're not easily distracted. That's what an industrious person is like. We don't know anything about industrious people. We cannot figure out why they're industrious. If you read the neuropsychological literature, you might assume that people who have highly functioning prefrontal cortexes might be more conscientious, because people associate the prefrontal cortex with such things as the capacity to plan. The problem with that is that we've, for example, tested now thousands of people using tests of dorsolateral prefrontal cognitive ability, which are basically cognitive tests. And as you know from being in this class, if you take a battery of cognitive tests and you subject them to a factor analysis, you can extract out a first factor, and that's fluid intelligence. And the correlation between fluid intelligence and conscientiousness is 0. Right, so that's very, very strange, because you would tend to think that people who were smarter might be better at planning, and maybe they are, but they're not necessarily better at implementing. And and we don't understand the difference between planning and implementation. We don't know what that is. You got to think about it this way too, though. Just because you're better at planning wouldn't necessarily imply that you're better at implementing, because actually one of the prerequisites for thinking abstractly is that you can detach your plans from your action, right? Because otherwise you just automatically act out everything you planned. But that isn't what people do. They separate out their thinking so that they can work in an abstract space that's divorced from their action, and so they can lay out multiple plans without necessarily acting them out. But then that introduces the additional complication of having to implement, and industrious people seem to be good at implementation. But we don't know why. We've done all sorts of laboratory studies trying to see if we could get some sort of laboratory task that industrious people would do better in the lab than non-industrious people. God, you'd think that would be a snap. We've probably tested 50 things and have never got anything. Differences in language use is as close as we've got. You can extract out estimates of people's conscientiousness or their industriousness from the way they use language, but that's not a lot different than using self-report personality scales. It's different, but it's not a lot different. So we've done things, for example, like imagine we present people with a row of H's, N's, M's, and U's, row after row of letters, small type. You say, go through and circle all the U's. Well, obviously, you would think that that would be a task that would require diligence and industriousness. You could time how long it took people to do it. You could see how accurate they were. Correlation with conscientiousness? Nothing. Zero. It's an IQ task, as it turns out.